Good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's special council meeting. We have one item on the agenda, and it's our strategic session with respect to water infrastructure program summary and rate options. Before we get started, though, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Cynthia, who'd like to introduce us to some new staff. Cynthia.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. I'm pleased today to introduce to Council our permanent and new Director of Kitchener Utilities, Mr. Greg St. Louis, who is up in the gallery today. Greg joined us last Monday from White Rock, BC, where he was the engineer for the municipality there. So he's had one whole week under his belt before joining us today. So
we'd like to tell you that the weather you saw, in the particularly over the last few days, is what we get year-round, but that would probably be fibbing. But welcome. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to you, Denise, to take us through the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and members of Council. So the purpose of today's strategic session is to provide an update on the Water Infrastructure Program, or WIP for short, and recognizing Council as owner of the water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater systems, discuss options related to the capital and maintenance program, and identify a preferred rate to be included in the development of the 2018 budget. Council is not approving rates today. Rather, we will be seeking Council approval of rates on final budget day. Oh, not sure. Thank you, Jeff. The structure of today's session is provided in two parts. Part one provides a summary presentation of the Water Infrastructure Program review, and following the presentation, Council will have an opportunity to ask questions. Part two of the strategic session, staff are seeking feedback on capital scenarios and maintenance best practices. With this feedback, the Council preferred combined rate will be determined to provide direction for the 2018 budget.
Okay, so just on that note, then, if Council can keep their questions until the end of the presentation, we'll deal with them then, and then move on to the three questions. So back to you, Denise.
Excellent, thank you. So the Water Infrastructure Program comprises all aspects of the drinking water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater systems, including capital investment and maintenance programs. And this video was created, I'm just going to click on it, to explain the interconnectedness of the three systems. It's about a 2-minute video.
Let's talk about water. Water is part of your monthly utility bill. But do you really know what each line means and how together these three systems allow us to deliver clean, safe, and reliable water to you? These systems are connected and play a vital role in creating a safe and healthy city and have a significant impact on your daily lives. Hard surfaces like rooftops, driveways, and roadways prevent rain and melted snow from making its way into the ground. Our stormwater system collects and transports this water through a series of drains, catch basins, and underground pipes. Stormwater is absorbed into our groundwater or natural creeks and wetlands before making its way into the Grand River. Our drinking water system draws water from these same sources. 80% of our drinking water comes from under the ground. The other 20% is surface water from the Grand River. This water goes through a complex treatment and testing process before it travels through water mains and out of your tap. Once tap water is used for our showers, washing machines, and toilets, it becomes sewage and wastewater. It goes down the drains and travels through a large network of sewer lines and pumping systems to a number of regional treatment plants, where it is carefully treated before being released to the Grand River. Investments and maintenance in our water infrastructure today help to keep our water safe, groundwater and surface water resources secure, and protect our properties from flooding. Our stormwater and sanitary sewers experience fewer breaks and backups, and we see lower operating and maintenance costs over time. Most importantly, we get to enjoy clean, reliable water for drinking, cooking, and playing. Now you know, stormwater, sewer, and drinking water systems working together to keep our city working.
Oops. Okay, so as demonstrated by the video of the systems working together, so too the Water Infrastructure Program involves a collaborative team comprised of representatives from asset management, Kitchener Utilities, engineering, environmental services, roads and traffic, financial planning, and communications. And a few of those representatives are in our audience today. This team also included the department heads as the steering committee for the project. So walking through the review process, in May there was a council strategic session where staff provided results of a statistically valid resident survey of customer attitudes on infrastructure investment and rates. Staff also received feedback on the guiding principles and water infrastructure program variables. A detailed review was conducted on both the capital program and the maintenance program as the top two variables identified by council and staff, and other variables such as grant opportunities, inflation, and growth, to name a few, were also reviewed. The results of the various reviews were input into the 3 rate models to analyze rate impacts and develop rate options. Staff also reviewed municipal benchmarking data locally, provincially, and nationally, and highlighted water infrastructure and supporting maintenance and capital programs on a council tour. And we are here today to obtain council feedback on a preferred rate, which will be used to develop the 2018 budget. So it is important to realize or to recognize that there are controllable and uncontrollable rate drivers. 46% of the 2017 combined rate is attributable to the region through the regional water, wholesale water and wastewater charges. The capital program is the next largest component of the rate, consisting of both road reconstruction projects and other capital projects such as pumping station rehabilitation, which make up 32% of the total combined rate. Oh, it's not. The maintenance program makes up 13% of the rate and includes compliance-based programs and best practice programs. The remaining 9% includes items such as administration and customer rebate programs. There is also an interaction between capital and maintenance programs as demonstrated by this asset degradation curve. Generally, as an asset ages, the condition degrades. Preventative maintenance and rehabilitation activities will extend the useful life of water infrastructure. And if we don't invest in capital replacement at the appropriate time, reactive maintenance and associated costs increase and service impacts are realized. The challenge is finding the sweet spot between capital and maintenance investment to provide the lowest life cycle cost. So the Water Infrastructure Program evaluated age, condition, and performance of various pipe assets to determine an estimated expected life for each pipe material to be able to project replacement needs. This work formed the basis of the capital program analysis to develop scenarios to address the backlog of replacement needs. So scenario 1 represents status quo, continuing with the existing capital plan of closing the replacement gap by 2032. Scenario 2 closes the replacement gap by 2037, and scenario 3 closes the replacement gap by 2044. Provided on the table, which is also described on pages 7 and 8 of the report, is the annual capital program growth as a percentage required to close the gap in the specified time frame for each scenario. I just want to highlight that these are not the rate increases required for each scenario, and we're going to talk about rates in a little bit. So in terms of the scenarios, there is an increasing risk of infrastructure failure from scenario 1 to 3. However, customer affordability also increases from scenarios 1 to 3. So it is a bit of a balancing act. Turning to maintenance, an extensive review of maintenance programs for the water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater system was conducted, and activities were divided into compliance-based programs and industry best practice programs. Most of the programs are compliance-based and have little discretion associated with them to meet legal and liability requirements. The total maintenance gap was identified to be $3.3 million, $1.3 million for water and $2 million for stormwater, and sanitary did not have a maintenance gap. Staff developed a 5-year phase-in of $660,000 annually to align with the rate forecast period. And this represents a significant reduction from the previous forecast, which identified 2% of the total rate increase for maintenance annually, whereas the actual maintenance program gap represents 0.57% of the total rate increase required. The maintenance best practices are itemized on the table and provided on page 12 of the report. The amount identified represents the annual additional funding required over the 5-year phase-in period and represents 12% of the maintenance program gap. So following the maintenance and capital review, rate options were developed based on each capital scenario and incorporating the maintenance program, both compliance and best practice, phased in over 5 years. For comparison purposes, the previous rate forecast for 2018, identified through the 2017 budget, is provided. Each rate option represents a reduction from the previous rate forecast, with the difference ranging from approximately $13 to $30 for 2018, and over the course of the 5-year forecast ranges between approximately $151 to $302. Should all the maintenance best practices be removed, these rates would be reduced by 0.08%. So the range of rates are 6.42 to 8% for Council's discussion today. Staff also want to highlight the 5-year rate forecast. Rates have been smoothed to remove any large fluctuations in annual rates and provide rate stability. In general, you can see that the rates are trending downwards. So in summary, a safe and healthy city requires reliable infrastructure to provide essential services. And when evaluating rates, we recognize that 50% of the rates are uncontrollable. Staff evaluated the relationship between capital and maintenance programs and looked to balance affordability with these infrastructure investments, in keeping with the guiding principles and feedback received through the resident survey. Recognizing Council's role and responsibility as owner of the water, sanitary and sewer and stormwater system, rate setting and budget approvals are the principal means through which these responsibilities are met. This is why it is important to engage in discussion through the strategic session and provide direction on a Council-preferred rate increase to guide the 2018 budget. So I'm going to pause now, and I'm happy to take questions, and then we'll move to part 2 of the strategic session.
Okay, great. We have a number of questions for you. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I like where staff is coming from on this. I know you had some direction initially, but I'm glad to see a report that provides some options for consideration. In analyzing the staff report, some questions popped into my mind, and I don't know what the answers are. So page 1.6, that you talk about the inventory of the pipe infrastructure that we have, from cast iron piping to ductile iron piping, plastic piping, and they got certain lifespans on them. The piping that has been installed over the years have varied as each time period moves along with the advancement of technology over the last century, let's say, for round figures. Is that piping used in all 3 portions? As an example, cast iron piping. Is that also in water, sanitary piping, and storm piping, or is it 3 different components? And same thing with the other ductile. Is it all? Elaborate on that.
Yes. Through you, Chair. That's a great question. These pipe materials, we do have plastic pipe and different pipe materials for all three systems. The pipes that we particularly looked at were related to the drinking water system. And the reason for that is we have a very good inventory of the pipe system, and we can analyze water main breaks and look to see failure rates associated with that system. So while we did look at all 3 systems and their performance, the best data we were able to do the analysis on was related to the water infrastructure.
So you didn't quite answer my question,
okay.
Although I knew where you were coming from. So let's use the water main piping. Mm-hmm. Is it been cast iron initially, and right now they're using PCV piping, basically? Is that the way it's happened?
Right. So we wouldn't install cast iron anymore as part of new construction. So cast iron typically makes up the oldest pipe in our system for the water, and then we saw an evolution into ductile iron, and then we saw some concrete based pipes, and we still install that today, and plastic pipe as well.
So in the future for servicing, it's all plastic piping? I mean, when I'm seeing reconstruction projects happening, I see blue pipe, and that's of course water main, I would gather, that's going to be installed. Sanitary is more concrete, as I would see it from the installations, from point A to point B to all the other connections, and I would assume that's the same for storm. Am I right or wrong? Is that the way we should be going?
So it really depends on the size of the pipe and the pressures that we are placing on the pipe to determine the appropriate pipe that's selected for a road reconstruction project. I would characterize, and I would look to Steve Allen, that likely the majority of the pipe that we're putting into the system right now is plastic, but there are certain applications for concrete pipe, for example, where we would put those into the system.
So the objective basically is try to, the piping that you install, I mean, you got here example of plastic, hopefully a lifespan of 100 years, that should do the job, but on the other hand, there's pressure points and stuff like that, you're saying that you need concrete. Is that the combinations that you use?
So that's correct. We would use some sort of reinforced concrete pipe under a high pressure system. So you wouldn't see the cast what we see is a phase out of the cast iron pipe as we replace, and a phase out, and we will see a phase out of the ductile iron pipe in terms of the percentages in the system, and we would expect to see a lot more plastic pipe in terms of the overall percentage of the system.
Okay, I appreciate that. And that's looking for the future. But let's go back to the past. Of all the piping that's been installed in a city over the last century, what type of quality piping has been the poorest in terms of performance that breaks down, deteriorates, or whatever the reason? Mm-hmm. Which type of quality is it?
So what we see, and this is not just specific to the City of Kitchener, but the industry as a whole, is that that cast iron tends to be the most vulnerable pipe in the system, and it's specific to the thin-walled cast iron that was installed, I believe, typically in the 50s. So the wall thickness of cast iron has evolved since, it's a very old pipe material, since it was first installed, and so the construction, the manufacturing methods have changed over the years, and what we really find is it's the thin-walled cast iron, which most of this pipe would be made out of, that has the most tendency to fail, which is why you see us identifying a 50-year expected life for that pipe.
Right. I see my time is up, but just to tie in with the piping, there's also talk about lead piping for water over the years, and that's been removed, but you haven't identified that here. Is that very minor, or is that still an issue?
Lead pipe is typically found in terms of services, and when they are discovered, I believe we remove them as they're part of road reconstruction. So yes, I'm not sure what percentage of the system lead services make up. However, we do actively remove them as we discover them. Okay.
I have more questions, but I see my time is up.
Yeah, if you can press in again. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanwick. I just wanted to thank staff on a great presentation. I'm glad there's some different options from what was proposed in previous meetings. I guess I have a few questions. First of all, one of the slides I saw, and I guess it's on page 1-5, the breakdown of combined water, sanitary, and stormwater rate. Because I don't have the bill with me, do we have that portion written 46% is attributed to the region on there?
I don't believe it's identified on the utility bills.
Okay. I think that's important, because I think it's important that the customer realizes that 46% of the bill is for the region. I think that's important and for transparency purposes. My other question is dealing with the video. That was a really good video. How are we going to push that out to the public so that they're aware of it?
So that work is currently being done through our communications team, and I did notice on my own social media feeds over the weekend that I did see that that video is being actively promoted, and I think it's seen a couple hundred hit so far. So that is an ongoing component of our communication plan.
Okay. Will we have that, like like on a piece of paper, a link to it when we mail out the bills or something like that, that they can have a look at this? Because I think that would be important as well, because people are more visual than reading. Maybe they'll be able to get a better understanding. Does that make sense?
Ms. Fletcher?
Through the mayor, the link to the video is on the Kitchener Utilities website, and I do believe they're putting it out in the billing insert.
Okay, that's good. Excellent. And one of my other final questions is government funding. Where are we at with government funding? Like, where's the relief here? Are we seeing anything in the horizon?
Mr. Hagee?
Through the chair, nothing has been worked into this because we don't have formal announcement about a specific program. We've heard that phase 2 of Clean Water Wastewater Fund is coming, but we don't have any real parameters. And so I can't tell you an amount. I can't tell you if it's funding for phase 1. They said, here's an amount and find some qualifying projects. So I can't tell you if it's going to be that same way or if it's an application-based where we're in competition with other municipalities, what our share is, how long the funding would be. Those are all the types of things that we would need to know before we build it into here. So any additional funding we would get would only, accelerate the program or could potentially reduce rates if it's long-term funding.
Okay, so we're still it's still up in the air where that's going to fall and land. Okay, and I got
Just maybe if I can just briefly add,
Sure.
I mean, the negotiations have started between the federal government and the provinces for phase 2. In fact, on Thursday of last week, the current FCM president and a number of mayors met with Minister Sohi and all of the provincial and territorial ministers. The agreement's going to get hammered out. Realistically, it'll probably be, spring next year by the time it's done across the country. I would anticipate Ontario will probably want to see it done sooner rather than later, so in light of the fact that we have a provincial election next spring. But I think that's when we'll start seeing some more definitive answers. But in all likelihood, they probably won't help us for our 2018 budget or the 2018 construction season.
Okay, and then my last question. With the options, I see the options all starting off at a higher point and then slowly, gradually decreasing. Have we ever looked at the other way around? Maybe go starting low and then increasing a little bit? That way they have a better shot of, preparing for the future, knowing that this is going to come if...
So through you, Chair, staff looked at, in terms of the City of Kitchener influences, a steady, an even and steady increase of the program. So it wasn't that it was front-loaded or back-loaded towards the later of the 5 years. What's really influencing these rates are external drivers. So, for example, the regional wholesale rates.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. I think Councillor Ioannidis must have looked at my notes because he is asked already all the questions that I really had, but I'll still touch on them a little bit, and I'll carry forward with this last question about the 5-year average rate increase or proposed rate increase. From the slide I had seen was 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.65, 0.65 over the 5 years. So I appreciate the outside drivers are, of course, the region and their rate on sanitary water. But still, can we not still do a reversal? And there may be a little bit of a subsidy, but again, we would recapture that in the later years. So is there still not a strategy around it that way we can front end the lower rates and then obviously increasing over the later years?
So through you, Chair, that's not a scenario that we ran for this report, but certainly if we hear that feedback through council today, that's something that we can take back through the 2018 budget process.
Sure, and through the 2018 budget, or even when you do some calculations, seeing if even it's feasible, because we are beholden to anticipation on what the region would charge. And again, there may be aspect of subsidy in earlier years if they're increasing it higher, but capturing it later years. I want to make that clarity. I don't think we should be subsidizing the region at any point. But whatever that graph may be, if that can be circulated to council, even before that discussion ends up happening, before the 2018 budget rate setting.
Ms. Fletcher, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So through the chair, we certainly can bring additional information back. I think just to remind council that what staff tried to do was balance risk and affordability. So we still have that fairly significant backlog of work to catch up on as well.
And I appreciate that and what Ms. Fletcher is saying, and I think we're all trying to endeavor to achieve the same purpose, which is to meet our responsibility, but at the same time to approach that balance too. And I guess as representatives here around the Horseshoe, we're talking about, you know, that affordability to the pocket of the taxpayer, not necessarily just to the corporation alone.
Just one more thing to add, and Mr. Chapman raised it. The region are currently evaluating their forecast as part of their annual rate setting process. So we'll also be bringing forward any adjustments to their rate forecast.
That's great. And as a part of this, is more of a comment. I would love to see an aspect of advocacy with the region in working with them, so ensuring that they're aligning a strategy similar to ours, because again, our efforts should be the same. The other question is, again, same question. Councillor Ioannidis asked this, but I want to make sure that you hear from more than just one. There needs to be aspect of transparency, but also accountability, and the focus is on accountability. Too often the region gets to slide their rate increases. And I'm not saying they're doing it nefariously, it's just, I think that we need to show what the difference is from what the city charges and what the region charges. And especially when we're talking about rate increases and the impact, when 46% of that increase is the region, well, we're really trying to do a lot with very little. Where, the larger increases dictated by a different body of government. So whatever way that we can clarify that, and that needs to really pop out on that billing system, be it through online, separate sheet, separate page, showing clearly what the region, we're doing the region benefit by collecting on their behalf, but that doesn't mean we get to just absorb and, it's seen as one. We need to show it differently. And especially with in the SAP system, hopefully that we have a lot more options at hand where we can divide that, the totals. My later question would be focused on, I don't have much time, I may have to ring back in, but scenario 3. What is the total, I don't know if you have the number, what is the total investment into replacement if we were to do based on a 2032, 2038, and 2042 replacement program?
Do you have that number? Okay.
And if you don't have that, ring back in, I'll give you some time. The other question would be, and the report says this, if we aim for a 2042 replacement, we're going to have a better emphasis on maintenance, and absolutely, so that we don't have breaks and incurring additional costs, even though that will happen. What would the extra cost be for maintenance that's recoverable? So we can see the difference of when we extend it over the additional, 12 years, what that extra added cost is. And as a community, we may have to come to terms with that aspect of affordability, even though it may cost us a little bit more. So I'll ring back and seeing if staff have answers to those. If not, that can be provided at a later time as we plan for the budget.
So through you, Chair, just to address being able to provide the maintenance costs of the reactive maintenance activities as a result of failures, it is really difficult to predict water main breaks and sewer collapses. And so we can certainly provide a ballpark number, but when you forecast out to 2044 and what we might expect to see in terms of number of water main breaks, that would be very much there would be a huge margin of error associated with that. So I'm happy to go through that exercise, but just wanted to caution around that margin of error.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank Thank you. Denise, this was very interesting to see, especially on the tail end of the tour. So let me start with my first question, which was around maintenance. I think one of the things that I saw when we looked at the road reconstruction was the condition of the pipe at that time. Has our maintenance been neglected over the last number of years in favor of the push for replacement of pipe?
So through you, Chair, I can't comment on maintenance decisions in the past. What I can say is through the review, we do know that there is a gap in terms of, most significantly in terms of our preventative maintenance activities. Both in terms of doing the activity in the first place and also the frequency in which we perform that activity. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was consciously neglected to invest in AIRP. However, we did find that there was a gap there.
And I would guess, even though you don't wish to comment, that in the past, when we've had presentations from Angela Mick, one of the things that came loud and clear to me was that our maintenance was not on par. So I'm really glad to see that we are identifying that as a critical factor. How did we, you said that we reviewed provincially comparators. How different are we in our rates, notwithstanding the stormwater rate, because lots of communities don't have that yet. But how are we in comparison to some of the other comparators that you looked at?
So when we looked nationally through the National Water and Wastewater Benchmarking Initiative, we saw that our rates were slightly lower than the national average. When we look to, and in the chart, figure 4 is a local comparison of average annual household costs for area municipalities. And you can see we're in and around the mid-range in terms of rates at a local level. And then we also looked at across Ontario through the BMA competitiveness study. And depending on whether you look at municipalities that have a population greater than 100,000, we are slightly over the average. When you look at all municipalities across Ontario, we're slightly under the average. So, and I can certainly provide more details in terms of the exact figures if you'd like to see those.
Okay, so in the last number of years since I've sat on council, we've had 2 previous engineering directors raise huge concerns about our infrastructure. They seemed extremely urgent at the time. So now we're hearing, well, we can take a little bit of a breath, we can take a little bit of a step back and move forward in a different way. How is this new program going to address the concerns of those 2 previous staff people who seemed extremely concerned and urgent?
Yeah, through you, Chair, that's a fair point. What I can say is that the original program, the Accelerated Infrastructure Replacement Program, was built off of information from 2002, and we know that as our sophistication of information collection and condition assessment, and as we've built up more data over the years, it really was time to pause and look at this data and look to see what direction we may want to go out. Most importantly, though, I think we also took a very detailed look at the maintenance programs and the interaction between capital and maintenance, and evaluating risk and ways to mitigate risk through preventative maintenance, but as well as the sense, looking at capital investment and what it may mean in terms of reactive maintenance response. So I think through a very collaborative team, looking at all the different aspects of the program and receiving council's feedback in terms of the variables, it was a very comprehensive review.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly looks like it is, Ms. Goldrup. One of the things that I want to ask real quick is, and I do have other questions, isn't part of the longevity and the soundness of the pipes and our water mains that are underground not just about the component that they're made of, but how they're put into the ground. You know, if the proper material is put in first, and are the welds properly done. So is inspection of the work that's being done for new pipes, is that going to be included in our maintenance program?
So through you, Chair, certainly what we found in terms of the analysis is you're absolutely correct. We can see certain periods of installation, local areas of where we feel installation may be a factor in terms of failure rates. We do have, increased standards and specifications, and the inspection piece per se isn't necessarily in the maintenance program, but in the capital program. So we have inspection staff through the capital program that inspects the infrastructure installation.
Okay, I have further questions. I'll chime in later.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Denise's excellent report. Just to pick up on what Councillor Fernandez was saying, the last few years we've had dire warnings about crumbling infrastructure, all kinds of alarm about backlogs and affordability. There's a lot of calm in this report. Seems to be a lack of urgency. And so I wanted to ask you, I think it says in here that staff are comfortable with all three options. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. It would be irresponsible of us to provide options that we didn't feel were feasible.
Okay, fair enough. And I'm used to, you're the experts, I'm used to getting a preferred option. You don't have a preferred option, or do you?
So we want to recognize council's role in terms of owners of the systems, and what we've done is we've done an analysis of where we think are three valid options. It really is based on council's willingness to accept risk and balance risk with affordability. And so I think you have three feasible options in front of you, and really we're looking for council feedback back in terms of that level of balance. That's fair enough. The buck stops here. So I take that as the answer. The other thing I wanted to ask you, in a 21-page report, there's only one paragraph on page 112 that relates to what's happening to the seniors, low-income people who will have, no matter which option we pick, will have problems with affordability. Can you update me or give me a little detail on that group that is mentioned, that is working on that issue, and tell me when we will see that report? Certainly. I'll start the answer, and perhaps Cynthia, you could jump in if I have any of the information incorrect. So I do know that this initiative was initiated through the area municipality BMP group, who identified a desire to work together to look at affordability programs. Since then, the area treasurers group have taken a look at options and have supported continuing the development of those programs, or the development of those programs. I believe that the intent was to bring forward a recommended approach to area treasurers by the end of this year, with a report back to respective councils in 2018. Okay.
Thank you. And my final question, on the question of reserves, page 113, again, I would ask you if staff are satisfied with that reserve situation when we're facing such a problem as this.
Mr. Hagee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say no, we're concerned about the reserve situation right now. The stabilization reserves, which are essentially our float for operations at the end of the year, and the utilities are negative. And so there was a discussion earlier about why are the rate increases a bit higher in the early years. it's true that the regional rate increases are higher in those years. It's also true that we have deficits in those reserves that need to be funded over the next 5 years. So there is concern about that because we should be operating with a cushion. Right now we're operating with no cushion, and we actually owe money from each of those utilities.
Thank you. I would say, yeah, especially in light of what has been happening in relation to climate control and everything that we've seen happening in the past few weeks, that reserve does troubles me. So that's a comment though. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple more people and myself for round one, and then we'll get into round two. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I just want to pick up where Councillor Etherington left off on the customer finance assistance issue. It was rated as the third highest variable that Council prioritized. So I'm just curious if it's the Treasurer or whoever, whichever staff person is representing Kitchener on this committee, if you could elaborate a bit about which groups are we looking at providing assistance for? Would it just be OW and ODSP recipients, or would it be a broader group than that, like a higher bracket of income, or do we have any more details?
So, through you, Mayor, I don't have the details right in front of me. I do know we would be looking towards, and the reason for the collaborative is because social assistance is really a regional responsibility. So we have had discussions around modeling affordability programs for water systems, water, wastewater, stormwater, similar to the existing programs that the region offers. I just don't have the details on those programs at this point in time.
Okay, so what would be helpful in my mind would be to understand a bit more about where we're heading in that with that potential program before Council sets the rates, because it would be, for me anyway, a factor with those people living on a low income in mind. So I understand that we're looking at a lot of players in this committee, and so it may not be possible to bring them forward to completion by the end of 2017, but it would be helpful at least to receive some updates on where things are headed so that we have as much information as possible by budget day. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't know how staff would like to receive Council's feedback on which of the three main options are we're preferring.
We'll be going through that shortly.
Later? Okay,
in
thanks.
part two of today's session.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Vervanovic. On page 1.3, you touch on the survey that the residents, that we surveyed 600 residents in April, and when asked to express a preference for managing the city's water-related infrastructure or keeping rates as low as possible, residents are more likely to offer maintaining and replacing infrastructure. So it's good to hear that from that survey, but do we have plans on some more education? I think the video was great. When we went on the infrastructure tour, it was fantastic, but can we get out to our community centers and maybe explain our backlog and how best to deal with it so people have a better understanding of where the money is going and the rate increases?
So through you, Mayor, certainly we see the communications and providing information to assist residents to understand the rates that they're paying is a priority, and so there has been a communication plan developed and is iterative. So as we get additional feedback and we start to see how large of an impact the work that we're doing is making, then we can also make adjustments. I don't believe we'd considered going out to the community centers, but I think that's certainly a suggestion that we can take back as we look at the communication plan going forward.
That's great. And I noticed too that this program will be repeated every 5 years, so it will be constantly updated. And as you're aware of newer problems and newer technologies, perhaps there might some adjustments to these rates?
So through you, Mayor, thank you for the question, because I don't think I mentioned that what we are recommending is a 5-year review of the water infrastructure program. So recognizing that in 2002, the best available information was used to develop the program. Again, in 2017, the best available information was used to develop this program. But we know that the quality and the availability of information is going to continue to increase. And so we recommend doing that 5-year review. We also think that's a risk mitigation strategy as well, so we can continue to evaluate trends and look to see how our infrastructure is performing.
Okay, thank you, Denise.
Okay, so before I go into round 2 then, just a couple quick questions. But one follow-up to Councillor Schneider's suggestion around community centers. One other thing you may want to consider is, are there things we can do at places like Fairview Mall and so on during Public Works Week to do displays and information things where there's a larger volume of people coming through and would benefit from that information. Even our market comes to mind. My first question is around maintenance, and then the second one is a clarification one around things you said earlier. And on the maintenance piece, I seem to recall that we actually have invested a little more in maintenance over the last number of years in past budgets. Can someone tell me if that, in fact, is the case or not? Because I don't get the sense that it was an either-or for us in the past, that in fact it was a increase in infrastructure replacement, but also an increase on maintenance to prolong our infrastructure where that's possible.
So in response to that, Mayor, you're absolutely correct. Since 2015, and if anybody wants to speak earlier than that, please feel free to do so. But we did, in 2015, it was recognized through the State of the Infrastructure Report, the importance of maintenance. And so the recommendation was a 2% annual increase to the maintenance program. Those monies have been directed to important maintenance activities and addressing the maintenance backlog. So we took a look at what we've invested so far, and then where do we still need to go. So that's a very important point. Thank you.
Okay, and the other one that I wanted to, I guess, touch on, because I just want to make sure that I'm not hearing you incorrectly or that we're sort of communicating incorrect information. Staff, by coming forward today with this report, and it's an excellent report, and I want to thank staff for all the work that went into it, but nobody's, I don't think, suggesting that infrastructure replacement is any less important than it was before. I think what seems to be is you've created some options, all of which have some risk associated with them, and that risk impacts rates. And so you're basically saying, okay, council, how do you want to balance that risk and rates? And here's the comfort zone that we're comfortable in recommending. Is that a correct interpretation?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, great. Just because earlier on it was seeming like perhaps maybe we weren't feeling that the infrastructure replacement piece maybe was as important as it continues to be. Okay, thank you. We'll go into round 2 then of questions. Councillor Yanetsky, if I can just remind everyone to sort of keep their questions focused because we also have 3 areas of input that staff want to get from us, and we want to make sure we have time for that. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, thank you. In your status scenarios 1, 2, and 3, you've got so much time frame and so much road reconstruction kilometers that you need to address. You got in option 171 within a certain time frame, and same with 2 and then 3. But when I look at 2 and 3, they have the same distance of kilometers for road reconstruction, but yet 2 different time frames. Is that correct information, or is that something I don't understand?
No, through you, Mayor, that is correct. Essentially, based on estimated useful life and the replacement demand curve, what we find is we start to see a bit of a flat line in between, in terms of that replacement curve, between certainly between 2037 and 2044. Following 2044, we start to see that the demand increase once again. So that's why you see a bit of a flat line between 2037 and 2044, and the 195 kilometers is the correct value.
Okay. The chart that you handed out here, the lower one, it's got the relationship between activities. And on that curve, when you start off on the left-hand side, in excellent condition, over a period of time, it decreases as wear and tear on the piping system. Somewhere along that system, you have to make a decision as to when you want to rehabilitate the pipes versus reconstruct and replace them. But that decision would vary from water mains to sanitary to storm. Which ones, now is this diagram applying to all three? And then although all three could have different time frames, is that correct?
Right. So through you, Mayor, this is very much a asset management concept. It doesn't, it doesn't necessarily, it applies to all three, and it could also apply, for example, I think in the last strategic session we gave the example of a car, and as a car ages and you need to put more preventative maintenance activities and rehab. So it certainly applies to any type of asset that we see that degrades over time.
Yeah, and I appreciate, and I remember that example that you gave on the car. So if a car's got a transmission problem, and think, well, it's going to cost a few bucks, yeah, I can replace it and the car will continue on for another few more years. But in this particular case, I'm just wondering how you would handle it if you've got issues with sanitary sewer problems, yet your water and storm sewers are okay. Would it be a rehabilitation thing, or do you have to say, well, we're at a point where really we should be reconstructing, and if you're going to do the reconstruction, then you've got to do all three. How do you make that judgment based on the research you do?
Mm-hmm. So through you, Mayor, there is a looking at the long-term forecast, what we're talking about here, versus selecting the individual projects and the candidates for both rehabilitation and replacement are two very different things. So we look at risk, we look at condition, we look at how many other assets are in a degraded condition within that road project area, the road segment, to inform and select the capital project. Where we would look at rehabilitation, or often rehabilitation activities are related to, for example, water main lining or that extend the life, but it's not a full pipe replacement. We would look at opportunities to rehabilitate areas where first of all they haven't failed so much to the point where it's no longer feasible to provide rehabilitation, but also where all the other asset categories aren't in a poor state as well. So we may do water main lining in an area where the sanitary sewer and the storm system are in fair or good condition. So it really depends on the individual's situation, the individual location, and there's a significant amount of analysis that goes into select the candidate projects.
So extending that analysis that you just provided and saying that your sanitary and storm are in very good condition, but the water main may need relining, it could be a point that, can you do relining twice over a period of 20 years or something like that, or for 30, 40 years?
I don't.
I mean, if everything else is going good, and the rehabilitation process is much cheaper, wouldn't that be the way to go?
So through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of any situation where a municipality has lined repeatedly. I'm not sure of the potential success of that. For example, we would expect lining might extend out the life 30 to 50 years, but each time you line or you coat the pipe, you're losing capacity. And I'm not sure how well the liner would adhere to another liner. So it's not something that is a general practice in the industry. And my sense with that is the lining technology is relatively new. It hasn't come to the point where the technology is looking at relining.
Okay, and final questions that we're getting down to. On page 10 and 11, you have the summary charts of a total financial gap versus best practice. And your analysis of providing the three options with the reduced percentage and cost over the long run, is that based on a total reconstruction approach, or is that based on a rehabilitation approach to arrive at your figures of 6.5%, 7, and 8%?
So, through you, Mayor, I'm not sure if I caught the question correctly. So you're wondering if the maintenance program is aligned with any specific option?
Well, that's what basically, yeah.
So all of the options have the maintenance program built into it. When staff evaluated the relationship between capital and maintenance and the risk tolerance on the capital side in terms of putting forward a 2037 and a 2044 scenario, we thought it was very important that the preventative maintenance activities, that we look at those in terms of the maintenance program gaps, and so there was specific focus in terms of risk management and the type of preventive maintenance activities we're doing. So there is a relationship there, but all of the options, I would say that's maintenance activities we should be doing regardless of which option. It just helps to manage the risk a little bit more. And all of the rate options have the full maintenance program built into it. But what we will do through an exercise as part of Part 2 is look to see Council's feedback in terms of the best practice items and whether there's a suggestion to reduce the maintenance program.
So my time's up.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me just quickly say, Denise, the tone of the report and the way you're presenting and your answers to questions is really well received, and I appreciate that. It's not a report that's beating us over the head and saying this is what you need to understand, and this is just the right way to go. You got a multitude of options on the table, and I want to focus on your question and answer on the three options and saying that staff would now recommend any option that would put in jeopardy safety to our citizens for their drinking water. And that, again, I want to get a surety that is the case even if we were to go with option 3, which is on a longer timeline of replacement. There is mitigated risk, I'm sure, but again, the first page of the slide said, safe and healthy water, and we would still be able to achieve that.
So from staff's perspective, all of the options are feasible. We do believe that there is increased risk of, for example, water main breaks and service-related impacts associated with that as you decrease the investment. However, we feel that that's manageable. We do respond to water main breaks today, on average, approximately 105 water main breaks annually. So we may see that number creep up, okay. But we feel that with the evaluation every 5 years, that we can certainly put the appropriate checks and balances in.
If this council were to go in the direction when rate setting with option 3, we wouldn't be putting safety of our citizens at risk. That was initially my question, and I think you're answering that, even though there is an increased cost for maintenance and repair. The other is when looking at these numbers, and we're looking at a fairly long timeline. If we look at the shortest option 1, 2032, or the later option 3, 2044, you're looking at 26-year or a 14-year gap from now. Are we taking into account, and I'll say this before I ask the question, it's not our step to tell you what technologies to take advantage of. We're not experts. You are. I think that's not fruitful use of our time. We need to give you overall guidance. And so staff, are you taking into account different technologies that will most likely come to lessen certain costs in the future when we plan for 195-kilometer requirement? Or are we basing on what we have at hand now, and we just hope for the best as time comes on?
So through you, Mayor, we're providing the estimated cost based on the best available information today. We do anticipate that we will see technology changes and perhaps construction method changes over time, which is why we want to continue to to evaluate on 5-year increments.
I'm glad to hear that, and that's really good. I was really glad to hear that we're going to be reviewing every 5 year. The other is, and it's a similar question, based on what our other orders of government, the province and the federal government will do, and over a 26-year period, there's going to be many different, different parties of government, right? And we're not taking into account what funding models may be available. We're only projecting on what's known today.
That's correct.
Okay. Even though we know that the federal government of today has said there will be increased focus of, subsidies or grants or monies to the municipal level towards infrastructure related to water as well.
Yeah, so through you, Mayor, that's correct, in that we don't know the funding levels or the criteria associated with those potential funding programs. So, for example, I know Council's heard this before, but the incrementality component of applying for grant funding where it can't currently be identified in the capital program, that makes it difficult to say we're going to do less because we know that we're going to get grant funding.
And that's a responsible way of forecasting, and I thank you for approaching it that way. But again, as a summary, if the federal government and the provincial government were to come to help with greater funding, if we have better technologies at hand over that 26 or 14-year time cycle, that will only help to reduce what is anticipated out of this report, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. My last question with the 30 seconds I have left. When said for option 3, 195 kilometers will be required for placement. So you have a 12-year gap anyways between 2032 and 2044. That just, the increased mileage or kilometers is essentially because more time has passed, so there's greater, there are other areas that will come in line for the replacement, or is it because of deterioration, because you couldn't get to certain areas fast? Like, I'm trying to understand, is it because the time, because we're extending the time, or is it just because there's increased time, so just, other areas will come to a age where replacement is necessary anyways? It's confusing. I apologize. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to get at.
So through you, Mayor, those, and I'll call them replacement demand curves, are built off of the estimated useful life of different pipe materials. So, yes, to your point, it is the additional pipe that becomes of age over that time span extension.
Okay, and that's what I had thought it was. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, so a couple of things. When we look at that financial gap on page 110, is this financial gap going to happen no matter what option we choose, or will it lessen?
So through you, Chair, this closing the maintenance gap over a 5-year period has been developed in all 3 of the rate options, including best practices, and so that's part of the discussion today.
Okay. What are cities like Waterloo and Guelph doing different that has caused their rates to be lower? And is this report an effort to adjust our processes to that?
So through you, Mayor, it's hard to say, when you're looking at rates, it's a percent increase on basically a denominator, a total program cost. And I've been at Kitchener for just over a year. I used to be at the City of Waterloo, and I remember looking at the City of Kitchener when rates were very static and Waterloo's rates were increasing, and wondering, what are they doing there? What can we learn from that? And I think all municipalities experience periods of growth in terms of their investment, and then also periods of retraction. And I think it's very hard to speak on behalf of other municipalities. So I'm not sure if I can answer your question, Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, I was kind of hoping that, with your background and our CAO's background, you might be able to have some understanding of that.
Ms. Fletcher or Mr. Reedman, you wanted to comment?
Through the mayor, so there's a number of different factors: the density of the city, the time that it's built, how big the land area is of the city that we're servicing, that factor in to the actual annual rates for replacement. So those are a number of the factors that would influence when people are setting their rates and needing to adjust them.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So what's happening now to the ARIP, the program? Is it continue on its same trajectory, or are we taking it a little bit offside so that we can add more maintenance? I mean, that's the takeaway that I'm getting from this report, is that we're upping our maintenance a little bit, we're sort of diminishing our ARIP program.
Okay. So through you, Mayor, we've identified, so option 1 provides a status quo option in terms of the capital investment. So that would be the same trajectory as the ARP. And then we looked at option 2 and option 3 in terms of alternatives to that scenario. But certainly the current trajectory is still on the table for discussion.
Okay. I noticed that the stormwater utility rates, and so option 1 shows the same rates as what we had expected for the budget. That's correct, right?
Sorry, excuse me.
Option 1 shows the same rates as what we had expected to show in our 2018 budget.
So through you, Mayor, I just want to clarify, it's actually reduced from the 2018 forecasted rate from the 2017 budget, and the reason for that, or one of the primary reasons for that, is because of the changes to the maintenance program. So through the previous rate forecast, it was anticipated that maintenance would grow at 2% of the total rate increase annually. Through the detailed maintenance program review, we've identified that we don't need as much investment over the 5-year period on the maintenance program. We still have a sizable gap, but we've actually seen a reduction from 2% of the total rate to 0.57% of the total rate.
So how would that affect our stormwater implementation, like our master plan? Because we've got that whole diagram that sits on my desk because I look at it often enough is that going to put some of those projects behind?
No, so through you, Mayor, in fact, we see stormwater at, with the maintenance gap at $2 million, we still need to invest essentially the same amount into the stormwater program. Where we saw significant reductions was on wastewater, because we don't have a gap on the sanitary sewer program, and we have a reduction on the water maintenance program.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Denise, sorry to harp on about this, but I didn't have a chance to ask you, who do we have on that affordability group?
So,
who does Kitchener have?
Through you, Mayor, it has been Angela Mick to date, and I know that she's worked with finance counterparts, I believe Ruth Ann or Ryan, on the water affordability study.
Okay, could I ask that we also, as our Kitchener reps, suggest that perhaps a senior or low-income person could also sit on that committee in the name of credibility? It's just a suggestion. And by the way, just piggybacking on Councillor Singh's comments, I think this council does need hammering over the head on those rate increases, because, especially coming into an election year. But that again is a comment, but thank you anyway.
We'll have lots of time to debate this issue when it finally comes to council. This is an opportunity to provide input into the ultimate report, and I want to remind people of that. Councillor Davey, you haven't spoken at all yet, so go ahead with your questions.
Thank you. Just to be honest, I believe this report's really outstanding. I appreciate the data. I just want to make sure I understand all of the risks associated, because as you said, everything, staff can support all the options that are put before us. Now, what I'm hearing mostly is that the biggest risk would be service level, so risk of inconvenience to pockets of residents when there's a water main break nearby. Presumably with the third option, there'd also be a higher incidence of water main breaks in going forward. So has that been factored into the rate adjustment as well, those extra costs of going in and repairing our water main breaks?
So through you, Mayor, we've assumed that the number of water main breaks would be, per our average, 105 water main breaks per year. We do know that we experience some very high years of water main breaks, and we may experience that again, certainly. So we may see additional reactive maintenance costs than what is currently budgeted. And we would need to evaluate that and adjust the maintenance program as required.
Okay, so the budget is for 105 per year.
That's correct.
Going forward, okay. And that was actually one of my other questions. So something that's giving me some comfort in the options here is that when we dealt with this back in we dealt with it over the years with that budget, obviously, but back in 2014, we hit a peak water main breaks at 160, and I think at that time many members of council and I think staff as well might have been a little worried the sky was falling at that point, and now we're back to, it looks like 20, last year we only had 68. I know it's tied to weather and that sort of thing, but can you comment on, maybe you might have some experience longer term in terms of that figure of 105 per year. Is that just a 5-year average? Is that a 15-year average? What's that average for?
That's the 5-year. Angela, is that correct? 5-year? Yes, that's the 5-year average.
Okay, and being that I think one of our peak worst ever water main breaks in a single year was in 2014, then I'm assuming then that that's a very comfortable high number in terms of what's being included in this.
We believe that that was a reasonable level to target, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Angela, you will, I think, can provide some additional information on the affordability issue. Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor. I am sitting on the Affordability Committee. We do have representatives from all the surrounding municipalities, so it's been very difficult to get together this summer. One of our main partners is Community Services at the region, so we do understand the issues. We do have existing programs. Kitchener Utilities actually is involved in a winter warmth program where we have funding, so we want to look at the possibility of jumping onto something that is existing. One of the issues we have is trying to get all the municipalities on the same page. Some other municipalities have different policies in place with respect to high water bills, so maybe their need is not as large as ours. As well, Kitchener's income is less than the other municipalities, so there's those factors to play with, but right now we're all at the table. We've got another meeting scheduled in October, and we are due to report back to the treasurers in October as well, so we are trying to sort out the issues and get everyone on the same page, and hopefully we can come back with something where we all agree.
Okay, thank you for that, that additional information. So I guess I'll turn it back over to you then to take us through the 3 scenarios, or 3 questions you'd like some input on. We're going to have to work through this in a fairly timely manner because we do have a caucus item, and we also have the young people from the International Children's Games coming in. So,
okay.
Go ahead.
So what we're looking for from council, it's actually on 2 items. One is the capital scenario, and the second is the maintenance best practices. And based on that feedback, that will, I know we have 3 rate options, but depending on which one is selected, we may have a unique rate as a result of some adjustments to the maintenance program. So the capital program scenarios are provided on the slide, and I would look to the chair to see how you would like to facilitate feedback.
So from what I understand is you'd like to at least get sort of a, not taking a vote, but get a sense of where the committee may be at, or where the thinking of this group may be at as staff moves forward with preparation of the report. So I will take some quick input on these, but again, I want to be clear, this is, we're not going to be taking a vote and people aren't bound to this. I want to make sure I keep the clerk happy in terms of the process as well. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, and respecting time, I'll be very quick. I think through my questions, I gave my opinion in the direction that I'm heading. I think scenario 3 is a responsible step forward and taking into account affordability. I think a lot of discussion needs to be had as part of the budget. But for now, I think scenario 3 is in the direction that I'm sitting on. And the key question I had in my mind coming into today was aspect of safety to our citizens, and I think all 3 scenarios addresses that. It's really concern of maintenance and some additional cost, but I think I would be satisfied with option 3 with additional information that's still necessary to come to a final conclusion as part of budget.
Okay. Does anyone sort of want to suggest another scenario? Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, I'm favoring actually scenario 2. First of all, I think that it is a bit more prudent in terms of our risk, but I think that it's 3.5% less than the original anticipated cost rate that we had looked at for the budget. I also think that we want to close that gap a little bit sooner than later. I'm a little bit concerned about the number of water main breaks that we had during those cold winters, and just my gut feeling, I'm not a weather prognosticator at all, but I just feel like we're headed for another one of those cold winters. And so I'd rather see us be prepared. I'm wondering if there's something in the bank, so to speak, for the fact that we didn't use all of their funding for the last 2 years. Is there something sort of in the bank for water main breaks if we do have a year like that? And I just think it's much more, as it says here, a more balanced approach overall.
Okay. Again, everyone stay tight. Councillor Ioannidis.
You said Fernandez?
Ioannidis.
Oh, Ioannidis. Okay. Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. I myself, I think the scenario that I'm going to lean towards is 3. I'm just being cognizant of all the pressures that's being experienced throughout our economy and as well as like globally and the pressure of everything. And I would be more comfortable with the others if I knew what type of help we would be getting from the feds. If I knew we got some help from the feds, then I would say let's do the 13%. But until then, I want to be a little more cautious, and I'm not trying to say neglect our duties, but this is at a reasonable pace until we get a broader picture of where that help may come from. And until I see those numbers, I think that's where I'm going to be leaning to, or see those any additional help.
Councillor Marsh.
I am oscillating between scenario 2 and 3. I like the idea of waiting on other levels of government to kick in an additional influx of funding to bring us up to where scenario 2 would otherwise bring us. But I am really still the jury for myself. I'm not finally decided between the 2.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would go for scenario 2 as well. I don't mind paying more for water, sewer, and stormwater control as long as we have the program we've talked about in place to help some people with affordability problems. I don't agree with spreading the cost of this over 26 years, more than a quarter century. That, to me, is dumping a huge debt burden on the shoulders of our kids and grandkids. So at the moment, I'm leaning toward scenario 2.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. guess I have a bit of a question of staff on this as well. To be clear, I think we should look at option number 2. I'm completely uncertain until we deal with it at budget. But my concern is this. We know that there's funding coming down eventually, and historically it has been iterative. So my concern is, or I guess my suggestion would be, why, if some of us are inclined to spend more money, would it not be more prudent to set a lower amount we're spending now, wait till next year we know the funding's coming through, and then we're going to have to add that funding on top anyway? Am I making any sense? I'm not sure that's a question for Mr. Haggie, but...
Mr. Haggie?
Sure. So I would say that's a reasonable strategy if that's the one council wants to do. It's, again, up to council, but that does make sense.
But in the likelihood then, so the likelihood would be, at least looking backwards, when the feds come through this program, they are going to ask us to add on top.
That has typically been the pattern, yes.
Okay, that really helps. So given that, I think for this budget I would certainly support the third option, but I want to be clear that in the long run I would look at option number 2. Unfortunately, we sort of have to play these games sometimes when it comes to iterative funding, but I think this is a situation where we can be prudent.
Councillor Yanetsky?
I know we're out of time here, and I still have several more questions I wanted to ask, but I'd like to maybe reserve those and maybe meet with Denise sometime afterwards, and more technical than anything else, because I think the answers that I may get would influence my decision as to whether to go with scenario 2 or 3, because I think there's more to be explored on this than we had in terms of discussions here this afternoon. So that's basically what I'm looking at, is getting a further analysis and then determining whether 2 or 3 is the better way to go.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor Vrbanovic. I also, going between scenario 2 and scenario 3, the initial lower cost of scenario 3 looks good, but then factoring in the additional cost for reactive maintenance may pull that up. But for the reasons Councillor Davey has brought out, the funding that could come, it's unpredictable, we don't know. So I do like the balanced approach of scenario 2, and the ability of scenario 3, if there was some funding, might move that up to the same effect as scenario 2.
Okay, and I'll just add my comment. I am sitting somewhere between 2 and 3 as well. I think between now and ultimately when this comes forward, I think we need to continue to pay close attention to what's happening in the discussions with our provincial and federal counterparts, how that will impact this, as well as some of the affordability measures that Ms. Mick talked about earlier on, and hopefully some of that additional information will be available and help us shape ultimately where we end and find that right balance of risk, of making sure we deal with what should be dealt with as part of this generation is dealt with, and what can reasonably be extended is extended. So it's finding that right balance that is key. Okay, next question, Ms. McGoldrick.
So I'm going to, you've already advanced it, that's great. So the feedback that we heard was that there may be, that there was, we heard a lot about scenario 3 and scenario 2. So I think we can take scenario 1 off the table for this year's budget. And what we're going to do right now is run the model based on scenario 3, because I think that's likely what I heard a lot of undecideds, but I believe I have one extra check mark with scenario 3. Okay. So what we're looking for from council right now is whether to include all of the best practice items in the maintenance program, or to remove either one or all of them. So I'm not quite sure if we want to, perhaps, I'll turn it over to the chair, but whether we want to do them one at a time or just go around the table, the horseshoe again.
Sure. I guess what I would if others feel differently. I mean, the amounts that we're talking about here are not significant. And I would suggest that whether we go with 2 or 3, maintenance is going to be key. And so I probably wouldn't be looking at any deductions to any of these. I don't know if anybody feels differently. If they do, perhaps this is your opportunity to make a comment, but otherwise I would suggest let's leave this the way it is. Councillor Fernandez?
I would absolutely agree, because when I look at the maintenance that's happening here, especially the valve and the hydrant and the water course maintenance, those are areas that are of significant concern. After the water tour, knowing that those valves are not being turned often enough, that's critical. Water course is where we see the most flooding that happens in a storm event. So I wouldn't want to see us, and leaf collection, I saw the guy doing my street today, and I remember biking past it yesterday thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I need to come out and rake some of this material away from the storm sewers. So we have to do them. We absolutely have to do them.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor Vrbanovic. I also agree. I think the best practices of the maintenance would actually help cut down on the number of repairs we'd have to do.
Okay, any no other comments? We'll move on then to your Councillor Ioannidis.
So we're looking at those totals, like there's what, 100,000 there? Is that what it is?
Basically 100,000.
Yeah, I would think that's insignificant. I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
Okay, let's move on then to your last. Is there one more question?
No more questions.
No, that's it?
But I think so it looks like in terms of the feedback, we're looking at a rate option of between 6.5% and 7%. So we'll go back, do some work, provide answers to councillors' questions that we weren't able to provide today, and come back through the budget process.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So I guess just in closing, once again, thank you. There's clearly a large volume of work that went into all of this. I think our tour was educational for not only for all of us, but as well as for our media partners that joined us in the tour and got to experience some of the challenges that we're facing as a community, and that helps us tell the story to the broader community as a whole. So with that, the next steps are outlined here, and we'll be dealing with that as part of the 2018 budget.
That's correct.
So with that, motion to adjourn. Councillor Singh, Councillor Schneider, all those in favor, opposed, that's carried. I'll call the special council meeting to order then. And there is one item to go into caucus. Somebody want to move that? Councillor Ioannidis, Councillor Fernandez. All those in favor, opposed, that's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Schneider, Councillor Fernandez. All those in favor, opposed, that's carried.